In this episode, I will be covering my 12 weeks at Rotary Rehab, which was in the same hospital that I had my spinal surgery. It was on a different floor and it was a large facility. I don't know how many rooms, but it probably was well over 100. And the gym was huge. They had many different platforms and many different devices, including a pretty cool bike that I rode a lot that really helped my legs start to recover feeling after being paralyzed. When I first arrived, they did an evaluation on me to find out just how much, if any, feeling I still had in my lower body. And I'm not sure exactly how much it was, but maybe 10%. I mean, I could wiggle my toes and do a few things, but for the most part, my brain was not communicating with my lower body, and I was definitely paralyzed. I have a hard time explaining what this is like, and I guess other people that have had paralysis before can do a better job than I can. But if you've ever slept on your arm or crossed your leg the wrong way or sat on your leg or whatever, and it does what's called, going to sleep, and then it's pins and needles and you really can't move it or feel anything. But at a certain point, that goes away and the feeling comes back and you're fine. Well, imagine that very first moment when you realize that you have done something to your arm or leg to make it go to sleep and you can't move it. Now, think about if that goes on forever. You can't move that limb. You can't move that arm. You can't move the leg. Now, try to imagine your whole lower body below the waist totally paralyzed so that you can't move anything. You can't move your legs. You obviously can't go to the bathroom, which is very, very scary. Not being able to pee was one of the most traumatic things that happened to me, and I had to wear what was called a Foley catheter, which is a catheter in my bladder that goes into a bag that I had to have hooked to my wheelchair in rehab so that I was constantly emptying my bladder into this bag, and they had to keep a close eye on it. For those of you that have had a Foley catheter, it's no fun. It's really not something that you want to do for any extended period of time. And it is dangerous in a way because you can get urinary tract infections much more easily if you have a Foley catheter because it's just a foreign body in your bladder. And it just opens the door for a lot of bacteria to get in there. And sure enough, I had multiple UTIs during my time at rehab over that 12 weeks. And it was pretty scary. I had to go on antibiotics. I had to fight the UTI constantly. I had to make sure that everybody was checking on my Foley catheter and that it was changed regularly and that everything was done right. Not everything was done right, and I will get into that as I go forward with this episode. But in the meantime, because I was paralyzed from the waist down, most of the focus in the beginning was simply to push and pull my legs, move my legs, try to get some feeling to start coming back. So mostly it was a mechanical type motion that the physical therapist did. Now the occupational therapist, that was a different story because my upper body was fine. And they worked on my upper body strength using weights, using all kinds of different techniques and machines to make sure that my arms and my upper body was strong, because I had to learn how to use the wooden sliding board. And the sliding board would go under my butt and they would push it up underneath me, and I would have to use my arms to then transport or push or in some ways slide myself from the wheelchair onto the platform, and then from the platform back to the wheelchair. And I'll have to tell you, in the beginning, this was very difficult for me. I didn't have great upper body strength at that point, at least not the type of focused body strength that I needed in order to complete this exercise, and it was very frustrating. So I had to have a very large man, or maybe even two, that came over in rehab, and these were the physical therapy assistants, and they were just wonderful people. Some were very big and others not, but very strong. And I got to know them quite well, and they got to know me, and we kind of became friends because they did a lot of lifting with me in the beginning. Now, when I first entered rehab, I weighed about 375 to 380 pounds. So you can imagine trying to lift me from the wheelchair onto the platform was difficult. Now, I did have a belt around my middle that was a safety belt, thick and strong, and latched pretty tight. So they would use that belt to lift me and help push me along the sliding board onto the platform. And then when I was done with physical therapy for that session, they would come back and they would help me slide back into my wheelchair. This was very frustrating to me because I wanted to be able to do this myself, but I knew it was going to take weeks of workouts with occupational therapists to strengthen my upper body. It was going to take more practice with the sliding board so that I understood how better to use it. It wasn't simple to be able to move your body when you can't feel it from your waist down. You really have to focus on watching your body move and not feeling it. That part was pretty scary, and I can tell you that I was relieved when, as time went on, I started to get more feeling in my lower body, and I started to get better with the sliding board, but it simply was not an easy thing for me in the beginning, and it tended to be frustrating all the same. The other thing that happened to me in rehab at this point was I rode a pedal bike, and my wheelchair would simply roll up to it. They would lock it down so it wouldn't move, and I would put my feet into stirrups so that I could pedal the bike, and they could turn it to different settings so that it became more difficult each time I did it. And so the machine would help me by kind of moving itself and helping me do more and more. And so a lot of times we would start out with the bike, and then I would move to the platform and we would do different exercises. Okay, for those of you that know me, I guess family and friends, you know that I'm constantly looking for the funny things that happen in any given situation. And I can tell you that there were a lot of funny moments when I was in rehab. Some stand out more than others, so I will share one with you. This one was pretty scary because I could have been hurt pretty badly, and I guess I got lucky. This was when I had been in rehab for a couple of weeks, and I was starting to get feeling back into my legs. Well, the problem with spinal cord injuries and then repair is that your brain is communicating with your spinal cord, and your spinal cord is communicating with the parts of your body that are paralyzed, but these signals are not straightforward in the beginning. Your spine kind of throws signals out all over the place, trying to figure out which pathways it should be using to make you do something with your legs, for instance. What this would cause is a huge leg spasm, and my leg would just shoot out to the side, or it would pull itself up, or it would just spasm really bad. And these spasms were actually good news because it meant that my spine was trying to communicate with these pathways and trying to get them right in the order that they needed to be fired so that eventually I would be able to move my legs normally. Well, the spasms were very annoying because they could happen at any time. And in this particular situation, I had worked pretty hard on the platform and the pedal bike, and I think that that contributed to me having more spasms because when I would do strong exercises, I guess my spine was really trying to communicate to the right pathways, and then the spasm would occur. So anyway, I'm on the platform. We finish up. Uh, my big guys would come over and they helped me transport into the wheelchair. And one of them that was pushing me tended to push me pretty fast as we went across the gym floor, with my physical therapist walking alongside, but walking fairly rapidly because I was moving fairly quickly. Well, all of a sudden, my left leg spasmed, shot out to the side of the wheelchair. My tennis shoe hit the floor, and it pulled my whole leg underneath the wheelchair. Well, I screamed very loudly. Everybody in the gym turned to look at the poor man in the wheelchair with his leg trapped underneath. My buddy pushing realized when I screamed what had happened and stopped. My leg was still pinned under the wheelchair, and my physical therapist was kind of freaking out. And they backed up and got my leg out. And even though I was paralyzed, I can tell you that it was painful. I was getting enough feeling back to know that this was not good. And I had stretched tendons and stretched ligaments, and I didn't know how badly I was hurt. So they took me back to the room. The nurses and a doctor came and they examined me and said, you know what, you got really lucky. Yeah, you stretched things pretty much under the wheelchair, but you didn't hurt anything, you didn't damage anything. We'll probably go easy on you with physical therapy for a couple of days, but basically you're going to be all right. Well, when I did go back for physical therapy, I can tell you that my poor physical therapist was just totally embarrassed. She was so upset. She goes, Mr. Fox, I'm so sorry. I had no idea something like that would happen. And I said, it's not your fault. I mean, you didn't know I was going to spasm at that moment and my leg was going to shoot out and get trapped under the chair. And, my friend pushing the chair didn't know that until I screamed really loud, and then he realized it and stopped. So, we have to look on the funny side of this whole thing. And I kind of look at it as like a form of wheelchair yoga. I call it the under chair leg stretch with screaming that covers physical as well as speech therapy. Well, my physical therapist didn't know whether to laugh or not. She looked at me like, I don't know if I should laugh. And then I said, okay, you can laugh. This is not a big deal. I try to find the funny in stuff, and as far as I'm concerned, this is over with. Don't worry about it. So this was just one more incident where, you can have accidents in physical therapy. It's something you have to be careful about, but in this case, I wasn't hurt badly or anything, and so I was okay. And as time went on, other people heard about wheelchair yoga and would laugh about it and mention it to me, so I guess, the joke worked. Now I would like to cover one of the more difficult things I went through. And this part is really scary because I almost died. I don't want to overstate that or understate it, but I came close. And this is an example of failures in the standard healthcare system. My theme of this podcast is to contrast standard health care with what I received at Encompass Rehabilitation Hospital, which maybe this wouldn't have happened because they were so attentive and top of everything. But in this particular rehab facility, there were so many rooms, so many patients, so much going on, so many shift changes, so many different people. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that contributed to it, but it was terrifying. I had been in rehab for a few weeks, and I had pretty much exceeded all of their expectations and was progressing very well. I actually had to qualify for rehab. It's not an easy thing to get into, and I knew that I had to work very, very hard in order to not only stay there and get the most out of it, but to make sure that I was doing what needed to be done so that I could eventually get my knees replaced and walk again. So I had my own personal goals, but then they were recording everything that I did, and they were assuring me that I was passing the tests and doing quite well until this one particular night. Now, it was a scary night because there was a hurricane in Florida, and one of my daughters was actually working at Disney World, and we were worried about the hurricane. And so I think maybe that stuck in my mind a little bit, worrying about her or whatever. So I kind of figured I would have trouble falling asleep. But actually I didn't. I fell into a pretty deep sleep, only to wake up and feel very, very weird. And what had happened is my Foley catheter became clogged, and I was unable to empty my bladder in my sleep, which should have been no problem, and it hadn't been a problem up to that point, but it clogged very badly, and my bladder started filling with urine. The typical male bladder, when you realize you're going to have to go, is probably around 400 to 500 cc's of urine. Gets really full at about 1,000, and I, at this point, had about between 12 and 1,500 cc's in my bladder, and it was stretched way out. Well, I had a UTI at this point. I didn't know how bad it was, but apparently it was very bad because I had what's called Pseudomonas aeruginosa and E. coli, and this was caused by many different factors, but what happened that night is because my bladder backed way up, because I had a UTI, my body started crashing. My blood pressure started dropping rapidly. Luckily, I was able to call for the nurse, and they came in and they started working on me, realizing that somebody had messed up. They had not checked my Foley catheter like they should have during shift change or whatever, and it had filled up, and now they were going to have to pull that catheter, which was clogged, and put a new one in. Well, they couldn't find the right catheter size. Things were going kind of sideways. They pulled the catheter, managed to get one that was a little bit too large, but they got it in me, and the whole situation was not handled well, and I was pretty scared. And so they assured me everything was okay, the bladder was empty, the Foley catheter would work now, and I would be okay. Well, I didn't feel right. I felt very weak, and I fell into what I want to describe as kind of a delirium sleep. And at a certain point, apparently, and I don't really remember this, I woke up, I picked up my phone and called my wife, which was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I told her that I had flesh-eating bacteria in my legs caused from me walking in a flood from the hurricane. And then I started apparently jabbering in some type of unintelligible jibber jabber that she couldn't understand. And she immediately hung up and called my doctor's cell phone. He rushed to the hospital. The nurses, he alerted the nurses. People came in, realized my blood pressure had crashed. I don't know. They told me later that I don't know that I would have died, but if this had continued on, it would have been very bad. Well, they rushed me to the intensive care unit, and I had a very bad UTI, Pseudomonas E. coli. This was what caused my blood pressure to drop. It was just the bladder filling up, the bacteria growing very rapidly, and causing my body to start to shut down. Very scary. Well, I had already been on multiple antibiotics, and so they were afraid to overdo it. The Foley catheter was the villain in this story, but I didn't have much choice. I couldn't pee. I had to have a Foley catheter. So they decided in the ICU that they would simply pump hundreds of gallons of saline solution through my bladder and flush out the bacteria, flush out everything, keep my bladder flushed out, and allow my white blood cells to work, my body to work, my immune system to work, and repair itself to the point where I would not have to resort to antibiotics. So I was in the ICU for, I think, 4 or 5 days and went through a ton of saline solution, went through all kinds of different tests. I came back from this, but unfortunately, I then had to requalify for rehab, which meant I had to go into a separate part of the hospital, which was an infectious disease section where they had to observe me and make sure that the UTI was under control, that I wasn't going to crash again, that things were not going to go bad again, and then they had to re-sign me up for Rotary. Well, I had lost this time, which ended up being about 10 days. I'd lost that time of getting physical and occupational therapy, so I was losing a lot of the progress that I had made, which was very unsettling. But eventually I did make it back into rehab, and I worked really, really hard to come back from that and to make sure that I was making kind of the same progress that I had been. But in reality, this shouldn't have happened. This was very, very scary. And when they moved me back, I never found out kind of who dropped the ball here on that side of the rehab facility, but they moved me completely on the other side with a whole new group of physical therapists, a whole new group of occupational therapists and nurses and nursing assistants, just completely different. So I think they were worried that, I was kind of freaking out about this, and maybe it was better just to give me a fresh start with a whole new group of people. And I'll have to say that after this, and word got around, nurses and everybody were keeping a very sharp eye on me so this wouldn't reoccur. But again, this is an example of a failure in a standard healthcare facility where things go sideways because of people that are overworked, maybe underpaid, maybe are not doing what they're supposed to do at any given time. I don't know the reasons. I just know that in America, the healthcare system will fail you in the blink of an eye, and you can get in trouble really fast. And it is scary. I'm lucky. I recovered. I had a lot of people that jumped in at the last minute, saved me from whatever. I had some pretty good doctors, particularly the urologists, infectious disease folks, that made sure that we were keeping that UTI under control. But when you have a Foley catheter in for an extended period of time, you really are running the risk of getting a bad UTIs. And for those of you that are curious, Pseudomonas is one of the worst ones you can get. E. coli is bad, but Pseudomonas is a very tough bacteria to kill. It requires very strong antibiotics. You can then overdo it and become immune to antibiotics and have a real issue going on there. The fact that they choose to flush my bladder with a very intense saline solution probably was a good alternative to antibiotics, but along the way, I can tell you, moving forward, I had to go back on antibiotics many, many times because UTIs are still to this day torturing me and terrorizing me. It's just not fun. I'm no longer on a Foley catheter. I'm at home, and I do what's called self-cathing, where I put a catheter in, I empty my bladder, and then I'm not leaving something in that's a foreign body that's not introducing bacteria. Yes, I'm putting a foreign body in there with the catheter, but it's only in there for a few minutes while I empty my bladder and then I take it out. Okay, self-cathing's no fun. I'll probably cover that at a certain point in an episode. I have some various tips and tricks that I've used along the way to make it easier and better, and what type of catheters to use, that kind of thing. I won't cover that here. I mostly just wanted to make sure that I covered one of the bad things that happened to me while I was in rehab. Okay, I can't leave this episode on a downer. And I realized that was bad, but you know what? For the most part, I had really good experience at rehab at this particular hospital with a lot of really good people. And a few of them stand out. One of my physical therapists, a young lady, that just did a great job for me. She was very attentive. She made sure that not only was I well taken care of, but that I pushed myself and exceeded the things that were laid out for me to do. And along the way, I constantly looked for the funny things that happened. And there were many, many small instances, but there was one that kind of stands out that I wanted to share with you. Okay, picture this. I transport with the sliding board from my wheelchair to the platform, and she says, okay, what we're going to do is I want you to sit there, and I'm going to put this triangular-shaped pillow behind you, and I want you to lean back a little bit, which I did. And she said, okay, now I'm going to take this exercise band, which is a band of, they had different colors based on the strength of the band, and this is what you would use in order to push your legs one direction or another in order to work out with these exercise bands, to put tension so that you were really working hard. She said, okay, I'm going to tie this workout band around your knees, and I want you to pull your legs up, which I could at this point. I was fairly a ways down the road and was getting good feeling back in my legs. So I pull my legs up. She tied the exercise band kind of around my legs up at the knees, and she goes, okay, now I want you to open your knees out to the side against the band and then hold it for 5 seconds and then come back. And then we'll count. I would like you to do 30 of these. I said, okay. Now, she's right next to me on the platform, and there are other platforms nearby with people working out and doing different things. I'm not sure how many people were in the gym at that point, but there were quite a few. So I stretched my legs open against this band, held it for 5 seconds, and came back. Stretched my legs open with this band, held it for 5 seconds, and came back. After about 5 of these, I stretched my knees open, and during the holding it for 5 seconds, I released what I can only describe as the weirdest fart I've ever done in my life. It was kind of a sound that just went on for what seemed forever. People stopped. People stopped working out and looked over at me. My physical therapist was sitting there with her mouth open. I looked around. Nobody was laughing. And so I quickly looked over at my physical therapist and I said, you know what? I'm pretty sure that was the key of G. Hold on a second. I think I can fart the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, again, no one laughed, and finally I just kind of yelled out to the group, okay, you can laugh, it's not a big deal, and people cracked up laughing. Well, word got around, and for about the next week, people would come up to me, not only in rehab, but just in nurses and everybody, and going, I heard about the Star-Spangled Banner, and then they would laugh. So, you know, this was one time where I was able to make a lot of people laugh. It was an extremely funny situation. I'm sure that farting was not something that was unusual in physical therapy. They assured me, yes, this happened occasionally, but not quite the way I did it. So anyway, I'm going to end this episode on what I consider to be a high note, no pun intended. And thank you so much for listening, and I will continue on with the next episode, and we'll cover a lot of different things. Again, thank you for listening.